Folks, joining me now is one of the most dynamic and impactful people in the world of professional wrestling, known for changing the industry forever in the late 90s as one of the principal players in the Monday Night Wars. But folks, that was just a brief span of Eric Bischoff's career, and I plan to enlighten you on this edition of Primetime. Eric, welcome. How are you, my friend?
I am very well, Sean. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really glad you reached out.
Yeah, and I know you just got a workout in, and we're both over 60 now, and I've seen you. You're in great shape. What do you do? What do you do for a workout?
Actually, I was in horrible shape for quite a while over the last couple of years. I quit working out and wasn't really that active and not eating real well. And I blew up to about 220. When I left Stanford, I was about 225. And truth be told, I probably shouldn't weigh more than 175 or 180. I'm not a big guy. I don't lift or anything like that. I'm not a big frame person. So I put on about 30 or 40 pounds of stuff I just didn't need. And I got tired of it. My energy was down. Just didn't feel all that good. So right after the Super Bowl, I started hitting the treadmill. I did 2 hours this morning. I got up this morning, did a 3-mile hike with the dog. So I put in about 10 to 12 miles a day, either on the treadmill or hiking, combination thereof, and just watch my diet. I'm not in the gym. Obviously, I kind of wanted to get into the gym, but clearly that's not possible right now. So just watching my diet and getting in lots of cardio.
Yeah. Do you ever do the martial arts anymore? I mean, I got into doing kickboxing, but mostly it wasn't to try and beat people up because I wouldn't be very good at it. But the workout was just incredible. So you still do any of that?
No, I don't. I get into a bar fight once about every 7 years or so just to make sure I still.
You still got it?
Well, I still had it about 6.5 years ago. So we'll see what happens, in 6 months or so.
You're due, right?
I'm due. But no, I don't do it anymore. But really, martial arts, kickboxing in particular, is a great exercise. And people don't realize, your legs are such a, there's so much muscle mass, in your legs and your hips and your glutes. When you start throwing your legs around and spending a lot of time doing that, you can burn a lot of calories and get in shape real fast.
Yeah. So, before we started recording, folks, I was talking to Eric that he's in Cody, and probably many of you already know that's where he lives now. And we're all going through this, I guess, lockdown, the pandemic. How has life been where you are?
Sean, it's, I almost feel guilty, so I got to kind of watch my tone a little bit. Because, we moved, my wife and I moved here to Wyoming back in 1998. We built our house here. And one of the reasons that we did is because we love the mountains, we love doing things outdoors. But we also like, living out in the middle of nowhere. We don't like being in a suburb necessarily or in the confines of a big city. So for us, this was a way of life that we chose 20 some odd years ago. And I was joking around with you just before the podcast started and said, really, for us, we're living the same lifestyle now that we did exactly a year ago. We don't go much.
It's a way of life there. Self-distancing.
It is a way of life. Wyoming's got a population density of about 6 people per square mile.
Yeah.
And where we live, it's even less than that. So it's really been no big deal for us. Our daughter is here. We brought her in from LA because I wasn't so sure how LA was going to handle everything. Yeah. And she's here. So it's been like a little bit of a vacation for us, as guilty as I feel when I say that. But it is what it is.
Yeah, I'm out in Arizona. I live down in Tucson. I know you spent time in Phoenix. I think you lived in Scottsdale. A great life there, and it's beautiful. But man, those summers are a little tough.
Yeah, we lived in Cave Creek, which is just at the northern border of Scottsdale.
Right.
And I absolutely loved it until about May.
Yeah.
And by the middle of May, I was loading up my horse trailer, packing up my horses and my Harley, and hooking up to the truck and driving up to Wyoming because the summers there are just. We've spent a few summers there, and they're brutal.
Yeah, it is tough. We're all communicating with the internet, and everybody's Zooming and doing all of these other ways of staying connected. And I found it interesting, when I was going to get you on the podcast is that I know that you have kind of been ahead of the curve on all this. I know when you did your podcast and then you were doing a lot of stuff where you were streaming online. What got you into it? And, were you thinking this is the future, or what made you start experimenting with all this?
Just curiosity.
Yeah.
When I was a little kid, I grew up in Detroit. And when I was a little kid, I had a neighbor, or my parents had a neighbor, I should say, that had a Citizens Band radio in his house. He was a truck driver, and he had a base station, is what they call a home unit, in his home. And I used to go over there like when I was 6 and 7 and 8 years old, and I would be amazed because he'd be talking into this microphone and be communicating with people all around him without being on a telephone. Now, we're going back to like 1962 and 1963 when, technology was what it was. And I was so fascinated with that. And then later on, my family moved to Pittsburgh, and, as soon as I got a job and could make enough money, I bought a Citizens Band radio. And I was just fascinated with the idea that you could communicate without, a hard line, a telephone.
Right. Yeah.
And as time, I got interested in ham radio. I got interested in all kinds of ways of communicating. So when, the internet started blowing up and streaming started becoming available and the types of things that we're doing on Skype, I was just always looking at the next kind of phase of technology. Yeah. So I dabbled in Twitch and I dabbled in a lot of other things, not because I was so committed to them necessarily, but I wanted to learn about it. And for me, I can't read about things. I can't hear about things. I have to actually do them to experience them. Yeah. So for better or worse, I kind of dove in feet first on a couple different platforms just to check them out and see how much I liked them and how they worked out for me.
Yeah, and you know what else is I found really interesting? I saw some of your Twitch stuff really was, and I'm wondering if you were surprised by the interaction. Like maybe you didn't expect, because I know you come in and you see all the hearts going, and then you're like, oh, Bill's with us, he's out in Idaho, and did it surprise you how because you don't think can I really connect to that person, and that you did?
Right. Yeah. It is overwhelming, and that's there was a lot of reasons why I quit doing Twitch. For me, from a technological point of view, because I'm not a very tech-oriented person. In fact, I refer to myself privately as a high-tech redneck, and I think it's more than appropriate. And Twitch was a little too techy for me. The process of doing it was just a little too cumbersome for me. I like Zoom a lot. I just started using that about 10 days ago, and I really like that because it's stupid proof.
It's simple.
Even I can figure it out.
Yeah.
And the quality's good. And but yeah, it was a little overwhelming. I'll tell you the other one that I played around with for a while, and I keep thinking about going back to it just because it's fun, is Periscope on Twitter. I had Jonathan Coachman still does it every week or every day, I think, because I still get a notice every time he goes live. But I really like Periscope as well. But with Periscope, I've got to do it on my phone, and the screen's real small, and I can't see shit. So I'm doing this, trying to.
Yeah.
I do it too often, but this works out great.
Yeah. Well, I'm always interested because how people grow up, because to me, that is what really shapes you. And I know it did me. I grew up, my mom raised 5 kids. I didn't have a dad around, and it has like this tremendous impact. I know that you come from humble beginnings, and could you share a little bit about what that was like for you and how it early on started to shape who you became?
Well, I'll just talk about the way I grew up. When as a kid, I didn't know I was living in humble beginnings because I didn't know anything else. In my neighborhood, and we all had the same kind of standard of living, and we didn't have a lot of diversity in terms of income in the environment where we lived. Detroit was in the 50s and the 60s. I was born in 55, and I lived in Detroit up until 1968, I think, when I was 13. And where my family lived in Detroit, most of those families came in right after World War II because of the automotive industry. So you had a lot of families that would come up from the South Mississippi in particular, Alabama, Georgia. A lot of families had moved up from the South because the jobs were plentiful and they paid really well in Detroit compared to jobs in the South. A lot of immigrants came over. The neighborhood I lived in, it was so great because, 2 doors down from me, or I should say half a block down from me, it was all Italian families. And when I say Italian, I mean, don't speak English Italian, right? Now the kids did. The kids did a little bit, but the parents and the grandparents, because they all lived together, they were all right over from Italy. On the other side of the street, they were all Polish. 2 blocks over from me, they were all German. So it was like living in a United Nations compound for me growing up as a kid, and it was cool because I thought everybody grew up that way. And the best part of it was in the summertime, everybody had garden. Now you got to keep in mind, we lived in little 700 square foot, 800 square foot homes. I mean, they were small, right? And they had yards that were maybe a 1/16 of an acre and had a garage on it, but everybody had a garden. And the Italian families, they had goats, they had chickens, they had gardens. And on the weekends, they would all get together and they would cook. And it was just so much fun because you'd wake up in the morning and you're smelling your neighborhood. Everybody's cooking something. One family's cooking spaghetti, the other family's cooking goats or whatever they're doing. And it was awesome. But it was as I got older, once I got out of that adolescent stage and started going to junior high school, it was a little bit of a rough neighborhood. It wasn't like, it probably is today or was 15 years ago or 10 years ago, but I got in a fist fight every single day. I got 3 times a day. I got to fight up the way to school. Usually somebody would take my lunch in the middle of the day and I'd end up fighting, trying to keep that. And I'd get in a fight and get beat up almost every day on my way home from school. And that was just a way of life. I didn't even realize how horrible it was until I got away from it. It was just what you did almost for entertainment, right? As a kid, which is really kind of fucked up about it. But that was how I grew up. And in terms of how it shaped me, I don't think any of that really had an impact on me, except for I grew up loving Italian food. Yeah. I grew up loving, diverse cultures. To this day, that's one of the reasons I love to travel. And it's one of the reasons I like going to places like North Korea and Qatar and, other places around the world that are a little unique, because I love to dive into cultures that are completely different than my own. Yeah. I love to learn about the history. I love to learn about the food. I love to spend time with the people. And I think it gives me a broader perspective on things in the world, maybe. But the one thing that I did think I took away from the way I grew up, and it's mostly because of my parents, and not mostly, all because of my parents, is work ethic. Yeah. I would go down, there was a little Italian grocery store about 2 blocks from my home where I grew up. It was called Lucy's. And actually the store is still there. Somebody actually sent me a picture of the store recently. It's still there. But I would go there every day and I'd pick up all the litter in the parking lot when I was like 6 or 7 years old. And my payday for the day was they would let me go into the cash register, and whatever change I could grab in both hands was my pay for the day. Now fortunately I had small hands, and it cost them about 50 cents,
$2.
Yeah, it was a big deal to me, right? Yeah. I felt like, man, I'm making money. And then I got a paper route when I was like 10 or 11 years old, and started working, in a variety of different jobs by the time I was 12 or 13. So I've been working literally since I was 6 or 7 years old. And it's just work ethic. And I attribute that to the neighborhood I grew up in, because everybody worked hard, and my parents, because they were a good example of that.
Yeah. Well, and the story goes, Eric, that you learned that punching back was a lot more effective than taking it. And I wonder, was that a life-altering discovery to you? Because that's kind of the way you've lived your life, that you don't take shit from anybody, really. You're willing to give it back if it's dished out. And was that a lesson learned early on?
Well, it was. And, as a kid growing up, I wasn't a good fighter. I wasn't a tough kid. I was kind of a runt. Most of the kids in my age group were generally bigger than me. I didn't start developing until later on in life. So I was an easy target. And on top of that, usually the kids that were, picking fights and taking my lunch money and that kind of shit were 2 or 3 years older than I was. Yeah. So You just learn. You learn how to you learn how to get beat up. You learn that it's really not that bad. I learned that there's nothing to be afraid of. People are so afraid to get punched in the head because they think, oh my God, what if I get hit? To me, I don't wake up till somebody hits me. I don't really get excited about anything till somebody lands a good punch. Yeah. Okay, I guess this is what we're doing now. But I didn't learn that, to your point, until actually when I moved from Detroit. We moved to Pittsburgh, and I remember like my second or third day in school, I was on a bus. I had never taken a bus before because in Detroit I walked to school. It was only 6 blocks away. So I was taking this bus, and there's a kid sitting behind me. His name was John Stockline, and he was a bigger kid, high school or junior high football team, kind of the jock, And he was sitting behind me on this bus, and he's pinging me on the head with this little metal trowel that he made in shop. All the way home from school, he's just like, ding, ding. He's binging me on the back of my head. And everybody around would laugh because he's picking up a new kid. And I thought, man, I'm not going to go through this. I just left all this. I'm not. So as soon as the bus came to a stop, after he'd been pinging me on the back of the head for about 45 minutes, I stood up, turned around, and sucker punched him right in the mouth. And he went down hard. Got on top of him. Of course, everybody broke up the fight. And then the next, he called me out. That was a big deal. I'll call you out, And the next day after school, we were all on the bus, and we met at this golf course near where the bus dropped us off. And of course, all the kids in school knew, the new kid's going to get beat up by John Stockline. And we got into a fight, and I just beat the piss out of him. And I realized then that kids who fought in Detroit were way better at it.
They had more practice.
And that fight ended pretty quickly in my favor, and I never got into another fight again. All the time I was in Pittsburgh, I went, there's a lesson there. If you're going to get into a fight, win it hard, and generally people will leave you alone. And that's what happened to me, and that's where I kind of learned, I think, to. I'll let people push me around to a point, and then once that line is crossed, then you got to kind of stand up for yourself, and that's probably where I look at. Thanks, John Stockline.
Well, yeah, and you still remember his name, so it was important. And I have a feeling that the martial arts part didn't come into your life because you wanted to beat more people up. What was it about martial arts that attracted you to that?
I had when I lived in Pittsburgh, my dad was paralyzed. He had brain surgery when he was in his mid-20s, late 20s. And when he came out of surgery, this was in the 60s, and technology wasn't what it is today. And when he came out of the brain surgery, both his hands and both his arms were paralyzed. So my dad couldn't do a lot of things with me. He loved to hunt. He loved to fish. He was a real outdoorsman. And he could no longer do those things. And I had we had a guy that lived across the street from me. When I was like 14, he was 25 or 26. That kind of he was like a big brother to me, and would take me hunting and do a lot of things with me. And he was also a Vietnam vet who had taken martial arts when he was in Vietnam. And he kind of exposed me to it. And because I looked up to him, he was kind of a mentor, big brother to me. It impressed me a lot. And then later on in life, when I was financially able to and had the time, I continued to pursue it seriously. But it all started, his name was Bob Raciapi, and it was because of him, really.
When did you realize you were good at it, though? I mean, you actually competed in the tournaments, and I don't know how successful you were. You must have done pretty well.
Yeah, I did. I was pretty decent. I loved contact. I wrestled throughout high school. I started in junior high, and I was never very good at it, but I loved it. I was probably, on a good day, I was mediocre. On a really good day, I always made varsity because that was important to me, because you can't get a date with a cheerleader if you don't make varsity. So I would always make the varsity team, but I wouldn't necessarily perform that well. But I like the contact. I like the physical nature of it. So when I got into martial arts, I got into a school in a system that was real hardcore. The group was from Dallas, Texas, and they grew up in a really hardcore style of karate. And it just suited me. And I was good at it, I guess partly because I wasn't afraid of getting hit. And the idea of being able to kick somebody in the head was really appealing to me. So I, like everything else, I threw myself into it. I sold a business that was pretty successful and decided I was going to become a full-time martial arts instructor and competitor, and I did. For a couple of years, I did that exclusively until I realized, man, I'm 27, 28 years old, and I'm flying all over the country on my own dime, fighting these tournaments, and really not making any money. So it's time to get serious.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you, as far as being driven, and I know when I got out of high school, I didn't know what the hell I was going to do, but I knew that I wasn't going to really get anywhere, especially back then. Maybe it's a little different today, unless I went to college. And what is it that made you decide, I need to get an education and led you to Minnesota, which started your path to where you would end up? But at the time, what was it that, you said, I got to get serious, and why there?
Well, actually, my parents moved from Pittsburgh when I was about 15 to Minnesota. Yeah. So I moved with them to Minnesota. I didn't move to Minnesota to go to college. Look, the only reason I went to school at all was so that I could stay on the wrestling team. I hated school.
Really? Yeah.
There were certain subjects, like I got A's in German because I like German. I like the idea of being able to speak a foreign language. I loved physics, believe it or not. That was my favorite class, was physics. Now, I was challenged by physics because as much as I love the theory of physics and so much about physics, I sucked at math. So it made it really challenging for me. But I still loved it. So there were like physics and German and a couple of, history I loved. Everything else, I never went. To this day, I'll have a reoccurring nightmare about once every year or two that I showed up for graduation and realized I wasn't going to graduate because I shouldn't have. But it was back in the early 70s. It was kind of on the tail end of the hippie thing, and nobody wanted to fail anybody. So as long as you were, it's kind of like everybody gets a trophy in today's
right. Yeah, you just show up and you'll get through.
Showed up, and they kind of knew your name. They'd pass you, and that's the only reason I was able to get out of high school. I only went to college to get laid.
Really?
Yeah. It's like I had no intention of going to college.
You've just blown my theory. I'm like thinking he said, I've got to do this because I'm going to end up better off than, anybody before me. But no, let's get laid.
I just didn't even think about going to college until after graduation. And then about halfway through the summer, it's like, look, all my friends are taking off and they're going to college. So I applied to St. Cloud State University, which, didn't take a lot to get in. And I went to St. Cloud State because a lot of my friends were there and the parties just moved from where we lived. I lived in a suburb of Minneapolis called Minnetonka, and the parties moved from Minnetonka to St. Cloud State University. So it was a great transition for me, but it was the same thing. I went to a couple classes a week, maybe, went to all the parties.
Yeah.
And the reason I went to St. Cloud State University is because in 1973 or 72, the year before I went there, Playboy, I think they ranked St. Cloud State University as like one of the top 10 party schools in the Midwest. So
there you go.
There's it.
Otherwise, you would have ended up at Arizona, which is also ASU was always up there. But when you get out of this, I mean, do you have a plan? Because we can fast forward to how you ended up with Verne Gagne, but what was the plan?
I didn't.
Supposedly starting a career.
I didn't have a plan. I was, I was teaching martial arts for a long time and just not making any money doing that. And then after that, let me back up. Before that, when I was in high school, I worked for a landscape and construction company. And after high school, I partnered up with a friend of mine. He had a lawn maintenance company. I had a landscape company. And we kind of partnered up and combined the two. And we did a lot of commercial landscaping and maintenance. And then about 1975, after I had been out of high school for a couple of years, our company was doing pretty well. And in Minneapolis and St. Paul at the time, they got a real severe disease called Dutch elm disease. And if you were in Minneapolis or St. Paul in the older neighborhoods, downtown in both cities, all of the streets were lined with elm trees. Well, these elms kind of got the tree version of coronavirus, and they all died. So the state of Minnesota hired contractors to come in and replace all these trees, and we were able to get one of the bids.
A lot of work.
Yeah, I was like 22 years old at the time, making 110, 105,000 a year. Now this is 1970.
Wow.
So that's
a lot of money.
And we did really quite well, but I got tired of it. First of all, it was the summertime. The busiest time of the year for us was between March 15th and about November 15th. Well, that's where all the fun is. I was working 18 hours a day all summer while my friends were having a blast. And I'm like, I'm tired. I was 22 years old. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So I sold out to my partner. That's when I got into martial arts very heavily. And I did that for about 5 years. After that, when I realized I couldn't make any money doing that, I was always been kind of a good salesperson. So I went to work for a food processor and did great there as a salesperson. And then they gave me a job as a sales manager, hiring and training other salespeople. And I had a crew of about 20 people underneath me and managed that team for quite a while. Did that. And then eventually, through a series of coincidences, ended up sitting down in front of Verne Gagne. And next thing I knew, I got hired to work there.
Were you aware at the time of, what a wrestling community that was? You had all these guys at Robbinsdale, that they all came from there in that area. And of course, the families were there because the professional wrestlers were there. Were you aware at the time of that? Or was all coincidental that, you ended up down this road and then started working for Verne?
No, I mean, I was certainly aware that Minneapolis was a big hub for wrestling. But again, before cable television, I knew nothing of, other regional promotions around the country. Now, I grew up a wrestling fan in Detroit. So I kind of figured out by the time I was 14 or 15 that, wrestling was very regional, but I didn't think of it that way.
Yeah.
When I lived in Minneapolis, I was a fan of, Verne Gagne and the AWA. Certainly knew that there was a lot of talent there because Verne was a big territory. So he would bring in Dusty Rhodes and Andre the Giant and, all the big Hulk Hogan, obviously, and a lot of other big names. But I really didn't know the magnitude of how much influence Verne really had on the industry till long after I left Minneapolis.
Wow. In your career, the early part of it, it reminds me of Gene a lot, Okerlund, because Gene was a sales guy at heart. We all know that, and he was could sell anything, was involved in advertising and kind of got in there selling for them. And it was one of those things where somebody goes down and he steps up and starts announcing. And it kind of happened for you that way. And was it something that you said, I want to do this, or was it just an opportunity?
No, as a matter of fact, one of the last times I was able to sit down and have a cocktail with Gene, we talked about the parallel. In fact, we were both in Minnesota. We were up at a place called Fortune Bay Casino in northern Minnesota. And Gene was sitting at the bar, and I sat down and ordered a meal, and so did he. And we were just kind of reminiscing. And I didn't realize that, Gene was, he was either doing radio or television. I think it was radio in one of the local television stations when Verne lost an announcer and heard Gene's voice and basically grabbed him and said, come over, let's do this, or something to that effect. I'm
and Gene was selling too. He was also selling advertising. I mean, he wasn't just doing radio. Yeah.
Right. And it was kind of the same with me. Now, when I got hired by Verne, actually was a guy by the name of Mike Shields that worked for Verne that actually hired me. But, Verne had to approve it, obviously. But when I went to work for Verne in the AWA, my role was to, and you know what I'm talking about. Some of your listeners may not anymore, but syndicated sales was still a big deal. A lot of the markets around the Midwest, Verne would produce. She had two shows. He produced one for ESPN and he produced one for syndication. My job was to convince general managers and program directors around the 5-seat area in Minnesota to carry the syndicated show because that would provide an opportunity for Verne to promote his live events off of. So that was what I did, and I loved it. I didn't aspire to be on television. I didn't want anything to do with it. Verne was
really?
No, because first of all, I was so happy to have the job I had that I didn't want to think about aspiring for something else. I was just thrilled doing what I was doing, and I wanted to do it to the best of my ability so that I could keep that job. and and Verne was very old school. Like he kayfabed me for so long. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere near the, Verne's office was kind of split into two sides. It was the office side, then it was the TV studio. Well, unless you were a wrestler or part of the production team, you weren't allowed on the production side because Verne didn't want the world to see how the sausage was made. Unless you had a job making the sausage, you weren't allowed in the sausage making room. And so it was a mystery to me, but I was cool with that. And it wasn't until a little bit like Gene Okerlund, I was sitting in my office on the office side of the building. Larry Nelson, who was the announcer at the time, had a regular go around with a bottle of scotch about every 2 or 3 days. He ended up getting a DUI, couldn't make it in on the morning of a day when Verne had flown like 40 or 50 people in from all over the country to do market edit promos. You remember what those are.
Oh boy. Yeah.
So now he's got 40 or 50 wrestlers in a room and no stick man. So I was in the building with a tie and shirt and tie. So I think it was Greg Gagne actually came and got me. Said, Eric, bring your sport coat and put your tie on and come on over, follow me. So I followed him into the production side of the, and there's like 40, 50 wrestlers. Sergeant Slaughter was there, Ken Patera, and Baron von Raschke, and, the Sheik was there. It was, kind of a big damn deal for me. Kurt Hennig was there. I think, Kurt might not have been there. But anyway, I walked in and.
Some big names, yeah.
Okay, Eric, here's what you're going to do. See that camera? Go stand over there. Now, this is Joe. Joe runs the camera. He's going to go 3, 2, 1, cue. And then he's going to go like this. That means you got 30 seconds. Now, here's what I want you to promote. I want you to promote this match and this match. I want you to tell us where the tickets are available, what time the bell's going to ring, and name the sponsors if there are any. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. It was horrifying. It was so far. And I'll tell you a quick story. My first legit interview, the first real one, not the practice ones or anything else. My first, one that was supposed to go to tape was with Larry Zbyszko, right? Now, there's 30, 40, whatever wrestlers standing around watching all this. The new kid, right? The Ken doll. I'd already gotten that name before Scott Hall. And I'm scared to death. And I'm surrounded by all these guys. I'm intimidated. It was a horrible feeling.
Sure.
And I got Larry Zbyszko. Now, Larry and I had become friends. I was a little more comfortable with Larry than I was a lot of the other guys because I didn't know them at all. And I get my cue and I wind up and I'm pitching my ass off. And I go to turn to Larry to ask him a question. And he looks at me and he just goes, busts out laughing. So did everybody else in the room. And I went, man, this could be a long freaking day. But we got through it. And then they fired me. They didn't fire me, but they said, thanks for stepping in, and we're going to find somebody that can do this job. And they brought and he actually sucked worse than I did. So, 2 weeks later, I was back to doing it again.
You're back in.
Then they brought somebody else in, and that person was worse than the first guy they brought in to replace me. So eventually, I kept doing it and doing it and doing it. I think either I got better at it or they just got used to the pain. I'm not sure which it was.
Yeah, you don't know which one it was. Well, I'm sure, and it's funny because people will talk to you. Kids will come up to you and they ask you, how did you start this? And they think that you step out in front of there and you're a natural, and that isn't the case. And I had when I went to the WWF, I had done some camera work, but it's completely different in a situation like that. And I remember that Howard Finkel, and I'll talk to you more about him later because folks, today when we're recording this, we learned that we lost Howard, but boy, kind of got me a little bit there. But he was just, great with me, like trying to bring me in and helping me out. And he was in charge of the event center, and Gene just wanted to get the hell out of there. He was done. Was tired of doing these promos. He was just glad some kid came in to relieve him. But Howard was, he's a ring announcer. So he had me telling me, got to project, Sean, you got to get it out there. And so here I am in the studio situation, and I'm saying, big event taking place at Madison. And I'm trying to, listen. And this went on for weeks where I couldn't even barely talk. And he would say, you got WWF, you got to get. And finally, it sounded like I was like the wide-mouthed frog talking every time I did it. And, I got to the point I said, Howard, I can't keep doing this because first of all, I saw myself on tape and I'm like, I don't know why they even kept me. But the point of it is that people think it just happens. And it took, I can't believe that they let me stick around for those first 3 months there because and I see people put some of that up and it's just awful. So, did you just said you just kept sticking with it and finally did it start clicking? What was it that you finally realized, you know what, maybe I might be good at this?
It took about a year, I think, before I started actually feeling a little comfortable. And I'll tell you what got me over the hump. First of all, I got a lot of direction from Verne and from Greg, mostly from Verne, because Verne was very hands-on and he liked to direct talent. He was really pretty good at it. I mean, if you talk to people who will be honest with you, guys like Hulk Hogan, for example, he gives all the credit in the world to Verne Gagne for the Hulk Hogan character. He really taught Hulk Hogan how to be Hulk Hogan, much more so than Hulk learned in early WWF or whatever the fuck it was.
You mean it wasn't Vince? It wasn't Vince?
No. I mean, you go back and listen to some, Hulk's interviews or read his book. It was really Verne Gagne who taught him how to be Hulk Hogan and how to be that character. And Verne was really good with me. He taught me a lot. He taught me about psychology. He taught me about how to carry myself and how to be a good announcer and what not to do. Most importantly, because as you know, when having never done it before, you have a tendency to go up and do what you think you're supposed to do instead of just being natural. Well, when you start doing what you think you should be doing instead of just being natural, it comes off really bad and funny. So Verne taught me a lot. And then I'll tell you where the transition was for me, where I really got comfortable, is when I started doing play-by-play. I learned so much in play-by-play about the psychology of the business, at least the play-by-play part, my role in it, that it applied to, working the stick or hosting a show. And that's when I started really getting comfortable, is when I started doing play-by-play.
Yeah. Was there somebody in particular, I was fortunate that I had, people like Alfred and Gorilla and, Bobby that I could actually just watch work and did a lot of stuff with Alfred. And he taught me the business because I really didn't know, like you said, the kayfabe side of it. And back then it was still pretty heavy. Is there somebody that, besides Verne that really had an influence on you as far as you developing, like you say, as play-by-play or as announcer?
Well, Verne first and foremost, Mike Shields certainly. Lee Marshall was the guy that I got to work with, who was a professional broadcaster. He helped me quite a bit, but I would really say it was Verne, because it was Verne Verne helped me understand that in play-by-play, my job was to paint a picture of what was happening. And he used to say, assume that the audience that's listening to the show can't see it. Imagine that they're blind. Do your best to paint that picture in such a way that if a blind person is sitting in a room with a television on, they can picture it. Let the color commentator add the sizzle, the little nuggets that kind of move story along or move character along. But my job, as it was described to me by Verne, was to really paint that picture and to create a sense of the dramatic, by kind of highlighting, an arm drag or a drop kick and react to it like it's really happening in front of you, even though it wasn't. I was calling it on the monitor. But I learned how to let my imagination kind of run my mouth, so to speak. And it was easy for me to imagine that I was sitting at ringside, and I just got lost in it. Once I learned how to call the action, I think my biggest asset was allowing myself to get lost in it like a fan would who happened to have the best seat in the house. And it just worked for me.
Well, and Eric, I don't know if you look at it in a sense that sometimes you get on a track in life and you just kind of go down and there's, it goes off one way or another, but that it's kind of that there's like this destiny. I don't know. I felt that way back then, that these things would happen. And for you, with the AWA, I think it was in the late or early 90s when it folds you get an opportunity to go to the WWF, as we know as WWE now. But how did that interview opportunity come up, and what do you remember of it? Because you and I can compare notes, and I've always wanted to ask you what that experience was like for you.
Well, I started working for Verne in 1987, and he was already in bad shape financially. Yeah. I didn't know it at the time, but he was. And by 1990, I'd gone for months at a time without a paycheck. I had 2 young kids and couldn't pay my bills, and they're repossessing cars out of my driveway and turning off the heat of my house in Minnesota. And it was pretty bad. But I was loyal to Verne, and I was desperate, but I was also loyal. Yeah. So I saw an ad in the paper, in the Sunday paper of Minneapolis, that WWE was looking for announcers. And I went to Verne and I said, Verne, I'm not going to do anything behind your back. I want to let you know that I'm interested in doing this, but I won't do it without your support. And he said, absolutely, go do it. You need to do what you need, and I fully support you. So I went and I did the interview, or I did the audition, and it was I desperately needed the job, Sean. It's hard to describe how broke I was. Yeah. And, my kids were so young, and, we were eating hot dogs and beans and rice and heating the house with propane heaters that I would buy at the local Target, and kerosene heaters and things like that. That really wasn't that safe, by the way. Yeah. So I really, really needed the job, and I was excited. I went out and I think I bounced a check in order to buy a suit and to look as good as I could, because I didn't really have one other than my AWA jacket, and that had a logo on it. I couldn't take it. So I got picked up at the airport, at LaGuardia, and they put me across the street at the hotel, whatever it was, the Marriott at the time. Yeah. Right. Limo came and got me in the morning, drove me over to the studios, about 9 o'clock, 9:30. Walked into the studios, and I was like, wow, it was like 10 times bigger than Verne's studio, right? Yeah. I was just like, ooh, ah. And then, and I don't know who I met. Pritchard said he was in the room. I don't remember Pritchard. I'm sure he was. But, Vince McMahon and Kevin Dunn were on a microphone. They were on a speaker, right? They said, okay, kid, grab it.
Edit one.
Yeah, all right. Tell me about yourself, kid. What's Verne Gagne like? So, Vince was interviewing me, really, on camera. And then it was the famous scene where he said, okay, I want you to sell me this broom. Yeah. I'm like, what? And somebody walked over and he handed me a broom. All right, kid, 3, 2, 1, sell me that broom. And I just did my best, you know. And people send me clip. I don't know. It probably ended up on the network somewhere, and everybody every once in a while grabs it and they send it to me, and it makes me laugh / horrifies me to this day. Really?
And I've never seen mine, and I would probably be the same way. I don't know what in the world got me that job to think about it, because I remember going up there and being absolutely intimidated, like you said, and going in. I think what it was is that I just totally said, you know what? At the very least, it's going to be a great experience. I'll have a great story to tell. And I really just relaxed. And I can't, you talk about who was there. Bruce, says he was there. I guess he was there. Vince was there. But I remember the broom thing that they had me sell me the broom. And Bruce, I've heard he talked about it on his podcast with Conrad, that he said, yeah, Mooney did a really good job with it. And honest to God, I can't remember a second of it. And I just remember the one thing that I did do at the end is I figured, well, they're going to probably have all these people reading the same thing over and over again. I said, I need to do something different. And I came up with this skit about, come out and rejoice and admit you're a wrestling fan and you love the WWF or something like that. I can't even remember what it was, but I think that I remember Vince thinking that with that was something extra that he wasn't expecting. But I remember, and I have to tell you this, that at that time was like in '91, and we wanted to get another announcer in there, because I wanted to start doing some other stuff, doing the more feature work and get some relief from that event center. And they brought, we're bringing people in. And when I found out that you had auditioned at that time, and they hired, I don't know the timeline, but they hired that guy Murray from Detroit, who was a radio guy. You probably heard the stories about this guy. He ended up, they were on, the talk shows with Vince and everything. But anyway, when I heard, I'm like, they hired him over Eric Bischoff. Like, if you would have been there, I would have been like, this is fantastic, because we could have done the event center and I could have done other things. But it didn't work out that way. And I ended up doing 100 markets a week for another year, or two. So it's funny how it plays out, but it worked out well for you, I'd say.
Well, eventually it did. It's kind of interesting to think, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the past, but every once in a while,
yeah,
I to kind of be in the moment, I think about what would have happened if, would have happened if I got hired by WWF back in '91. I probably wouldn't have ended up in WCW, more than likely.
Right. Yeah.
Had I not gone to WCW, none of the Monday Night War stuff would have ever happened.
Right.
And when you start thinking about life, not just wrestling or careers, but when you start thinking about just those moments in your life that at the time you don't really think about how significant they are or not, but when you look back, you go, wow, what if I would have gotten hired at WWF? My life would have turned out completely differently, and so would have a lot of other people's, by the way. You could drive yourself crazy looking at that. But I often think about that, and especially my history with WWF. Applying for a job in '91, not getting hired, going head to head with them, Monday Night Wars, then going there as a talent, then being gone for a while, then getting hired as an executive director, then getting let go. I mean, it just seems like WWE has been in my life one way, shape, or form, really since the early '90s, and just interesting, I guess.
Yeah, but it's all about opportunity, and the WCW did happen. And how did that chance come about? Because after that, you're probably thinking, now what the hell do I do? And then the WCW comes along.
Well, I stuck with Verne, and things got progressively worse. The handwriting was on the wall, and it was the same thing. I had heard, and I can't remember how I heard it, but I had heard that WCW was looking for announcers. I didn't even know what WCW was because we didn't get TBS in Minneapolis, or at least if we did get it, I never watched it. But somebody told me about it, and I had an agent at the time because I was a print model and commercial actor, and I had an agent. Her name was Stevie Kozachoke, and I said, Stevie, do me a favor. The guy's name is Jim Herd. Just put together, send him a couple headshots, a couple videotapes of some of the commercial work I've done, send him some of the Verne Gagne stuff, and let's just see if there's any interest. So my agent sent it off to Jim Herd, and then I got a call back, really within days, and got the opportunity to come down and audition for WCW.
Wow. And one thing led to another. And you talk about those early days where you were, as they refer to you, the third announcer, and that initially you didn't get a whole lot of respect there. What were those early days of the WCW like?
For me, well, first of all, when my wife and I lived in a house out in a rural part of Minneapolis called Prior Lake. And again, our kids were really young. It's 1991. We were flat ass broke. We had a mattress on the floor. We didn't have a box spring or a bed or anything. We just had a mattress on the floor. And I remember we had a phone in the room, a hard line. And I remember when I got that phone call from WCW, Jim Herd's office, asking me to come in for an audition. I literally, I jumped probably 4 feet in the air. I was so excited because, again, we were desperate.
Yeah.
When I was working for Verne, I was making $600 a week, right? 30 grand a year, a little more than 30 grand a year, and just barely getting by. And then, of course, when he quit paying me, obviously I didn't have a lot of money in the bank, so things got real tough. When I got to the audition for WCW, and I've told the story many times, but my audition was with Diamond Dallas Page, who I worked with in AWA, by the way. I had known Page. We didn't really get along all that well. Last time I had seen Page, we ended up in a pull apart and almost got into a fight in a hotel after TV taping. So Page wasn't my favorite person, nor was I his. But he was going to be my color commentator for this audition. And when I found out, I went from being completely elated because I got this audition and I felt pretty confident in my ability. And then I find out that Diamond Dallas Page is going to be my partner in this audition. I went, oh, he's going to bury me. Because he had already been there. He was already there. He was established. Yeah. And it was exactly the opposite. And this is like, if you want a definition of Diamond Dallas Page, even back then, this is him. Mm-hmm. Despite the, rough relationship that he and I had together, previous to that, he sat down and he said, look, this is what they're looking for. I know what they're looking for because I've been hearing them talk about it now for weeks. This is what they're looking for. Here's how you should, carry yourself in this, in this play-by-play. Here's a list of the kind of things that they like to hear. He really coached me through it. Wow. And I did the audition with him. Keith Mitchell sent the audition tape up to Jim Hurd while I was eating lunch at the CNN Center, praying, keeping my fingers crossed, talking to Buddha, you name it, I was doing it. And they finally called me up and said, all right, kid, you're hired. 70 grand. Wow. To me at that time, $70,000 a year was like $700,000 a year. Yeah. I was just elated. And I had a blast, while I was the third string announcer. I didn't care. I didn't have a go. I just wanted to do the best job I could do. I did as much as I could do. I'd volunteer for anything and everything. And I had a ball doing it.
So as it went along, did you start getting more influence, become more comfortable, more confident, or were you always kind of at that level until things really started to change there?
No, I was at that level.
Was it a gradual thing?
No, it was an overnight thing. I was the C Squad announcer, all the way up through, I survived Jim Hurd. I survived Kip Fry. Bill Watts was in charge. And at the time Bill Watts was in charge, I was fed up with it. I hated Bill Watts. I always say hate. I don't like to use that word. I didn't like Bill Watts at all. I didn't have any respect for Bill Watts, zero respect for him because of the way he treated people. He was a bully. He's an insecure bully, in my opinion. But he was a big guy, so he could get away with it, right? It never impressed me. And after a couple months of Bill Watts, I told my wife, I said, this is going to work for me. I'm going to find something else. And I was actually out in LA pitching television shows. I had pitched a show to, back then, Fox had a kids network called the Fox Kids Network on Saturday mornings. They had a block from like 8 to 11. And I pitched a show along with Jason Hervey, pitched a show to them that they bought. And I thought, well, that was easy enough. I flew out there, took 2 meetings, sold a show. I'm going to move to Hollywood. Anybody could do this, right? So I was on my way out. And then right about the time, maybe a couple weeks before I was ready to give my notice, Watts got fired for some stupid shit that he deserved to be fired for. And Bill Shaw came down. Bill was the vice president of human resources at Turner Broadcasting. He wasn't a WCW guy. He was a Turner Broadcasting guy that reported directly to Ted Turner. And Bill came down and laid down the law. And he said, look, Ted is within 5 minutes of pulling the plug on this company. He's had it. The stuff, I'm not going to go into the stuff that Bill did, but anybody that's hearing this probably knows. It was very high profile, very ugly, very uncomfortable, especially for Ted Turner and a company like Turner Broadcasting in Atlanta. So we were on thin ice, and Bill was very honest about it. He said, look, this company's been losing $10, $15 million a year. It's nothing but bad PR. Nobody else in Turner Broadcasting wants this company to exist. The only reason it does is because Ted Turner likes the content. But if you guys can't figure out a way to turn this thing around in less than a year, they're going to pull the plug. So I figured, well, I've got nothing to lose, right? I mean, what's the worst going to happen? I'm going to stick around for a year and they're going to pull the plug, or I can throw my name in the hat. Because by that time, I had seen enough of WCW. I had learned enough about the business working for Verne. And again, I'll make this point because I often don't make this. When I was working for Verne, first of all, I got the opportunity to work for Verne because Verne was broke. He couldn't afford to hire anybody that was actually good at what I was doing. Right? He could afford me because I would have worked for free.
Yeah.
But in the environment that I was in with Verne, I got to learn production.
Mm-hmm.
I got to learn how to edit. I got to learn how to run a camera. I got to be a fly on the wall and listen to Verne and Greg direct talent during interviews, right? And learn that process just by being a fly on the wall for a couple of years. I got to promote live events. I put together corporate sponsorships with one of the biggest beer companies in the Midwest for a touch football game that, drew over 10,000 people at the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome and raised $150,000. I did a lot of stuff and learned about the business of the wrestling business only because I was in the right place at the right time. And Verne couldn't afford to hire anybody that was actually good at it. So I got to learn on the job. So by the time I had a couple of years, with Verne doing all of those, the only thing I never did was wrestle or put up a ring when I worked for Verne. Those are the only two things I didn't do. Everything else about the business, I did a lot of. And then when I got to WCW, I was able to, again, fly on the wall, third string quarterback, right? Sat on the bench most of the time and just watched. But by that time, I had a pretty strong opinion about what was right and what was wrong with WCW. So when Bill Shaw kind of laid down the law and said, all right, we're looking for an executive producer, somebody not from the wrestling world. We're not looking for another wrestler to come in and be the head of the company because that hasn't been working out for them. We want somebody that understands television. Well, I kind of understood television and felt like I'm going to at least throw my name in the hat. And I did, and ended up getting the job as executive producer. But that literally, looking back at it, it didn't happen overnight, but it kind of did. It was I went from leaving the company because I didn't like working for Bill Watts to being the executive producer, overseeing all of the television production within a period of about a week.
Well, and you look at it probably back then, people were just, floored that you got that position, but it sounded like two people felt you could do the job, you and Bill Shaw, and you felt you were prepared for it. And, folks, we're not going to go into all of the Monday Night Wars. It has been well documented. There are books. And if you really want to get to the source, tune into 83 Weeks every week with Eric and Conrad. But I have to tell you, Eric, one thing that has intrigued me about, all the reading I've done about it and, of course, listened to, what really stands out to me is when you were when you were taking over there, you realized early on that you were not going to compete doing what the WWE did, that you could beat them by being different. And did that come to you at that point in time, or had you looked at things that way before? Because that's what made the difference.
I'm not sure, when that reality or when that realization started forming in my head. It became crystal clear when I was in a meeting with Ted Turner and going head to head with WWF at the time, WWF was never a topic of conversation. It wasn't a thought in my mind. I never even thought about it. The only thing I was focused on was making $1 a profit, because WCW had never made $1 profit. They had been losing millions of dollars every year, sometimes 10, sometimes 8, sometimes 15, but they had never turned a profit. And everybody within Turner Broadcasting was convinced that it was impossible to turn a profit. So that was my motivation. I just want to make, I don't want to make $20 million. I just want to make $1. Yeah. I didn't want to make $2. I just want to make $1. I want to be the first guy to turn $1 a profit in WCW. So that was the only thing I was focused on. And as a part of that process, I had a meeting with Ted Turner on to talk about another piece of business that had nothing to do with WWF. It was to discuss international programming. I wanted to do a deal with Star TV, which was owned by Rupert Murdoch. Ted Turner and Rupert Murdoch were like this, right? So I had to get permission from Ted in order to do a deal with Rupert Murdoch's company. That was the reason for the meeting. And I got into that meeting, and you probably heard the story. I won't repeat it again, but within about 45 seconds, Ted completely abandoned the conversation about doing the deal with Rupert Murdoch's company and asked me point blank, what do we got to do to compete with Vince McMahon and the WWF? And the only thing I could think of, and I went back to, I didn't bring this up, but in addition to, martial arts and wrestling, I also was a Golden Gloves boxer, or trained with some Golden Gloves boxers. Mm-hmm. And the first thing you learn in boxing when you're getting your brains, punched out is to kind of tuck your chin, look up over your
rope-a-dope.
Protect yourself, keep your chin in your chest, and try not to get hit till you figure out what to do next. And I was kind of in my own mind, tucking my chin and covering up, trying, okay, now what am I supposed to say? I can't bullshit the Turner. I just pointed out the obvious. I said, well, Ted, we're at 6:05 Eastern on Saturday, which is 3:05 Pacific, right? On a Saturday, they're at prime time Monday nights. I'm not sure we can compete like that. And then he looked over at Scott Sassa, who was in the room, and said, Scott, give Eric, 2 hours every Monday night, head-to-head with WWF.
And you went, oh, shit.
Scott Sassa, who was the heir apparent to Ted Turner at the time, he was like, what the fuck? Harvey Schiller, who was my boss, was in the room, and he was looking around, heard a noise he had never heard before. He was kind
what just happened?
Where did that come from? And I walked out of there going, okay, I'm going to do one of two things. I'm either going to fail miserably or I'm going to succeed like nobody's ever imagined.
Brilliantly. Yeah.
There's only two choices. I'm either going to succeed or I'm going to fail. And I didn't want to fail. So I know people don't believe me because I say this and people go, okay, right. But I literally locked myself in my office for 8 or 10 hours, wouldn't take a phone call, wouldn't talk to anybody, wouldn't let anybody come into my office. I sat there with a yellow legal pad and a pen and a ruler, and I drew a line down the middle of the page, and I said, okay, I'm either going to be better than the WWF, less than the WWF, or different than the WWF. Those are my only three choices. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No way I'm going to be better. They've been around for 2 generations, 3 generations. They were the incumbent. They had a big foothold of, the 80s. I mean, they were huge, right? So there's no way I'm going to be better than them at what they do. But what they did at that time, the tone of their content was very, the characters were very animated. They were very, I say cartoonish, and I don't mean that derisively, but they were
characters. Yeah,
they were characters that appealed to teens and preteens because that's where their money was. Yeah. That's licensing and merchandising.
Family entertainment.
That's where the money was, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, well, I can't do that. There's no way I'm going to be better than them at that. I absolutely don't want to be less than them. So I've really only got one choice. I don't have 3 choices. I have one choice. I have to be different. And that's when it crystallized. I thought, okay, if I have to be different, I've got to figure out how to be different. So I made a list of all of the strengths of WWF. And I took each one of them and went, okay, how can I do that differently? Starting with, they're a tape show. Good. I'm going to be live. They have very animated characters that are targeted towards teens and preteens. Cool. I'm going to go 18 to 39 male. And I literally made a list of all the ways that I could be different. Some of them made sense, some of them didn't. And once I got through that process in my head and could see that picture and convince myself that it was the right thing to do, then I became like, have you ever been around an alcoholic who, finally gets clean and sober and has been clean and sober for many, many years and is kind of an evangelist, for the 12-step program, or somebody that finds religion, that had never found religion before, that they can't stop talking about it. That was me with my vision of being different than the WWF, because I could see it in my head. It made sense to me. I believed it, and more importantly, I could see the picture in my head. And that's when I knew. When I can see the picture, sometimes I'll hear an idea or I'll come up with my own ideas, and there's no picture. It's sketchy. It's fuzzy. It'll come in and it'll go out, and I just can't hang on to the visual that I need to see in my head. And there are other times when I'll be on a treadmill and I'll have an idea, and it's like looking at a movie in my head. It's literally like a movie, and it plays out like a movie. And that's when I know if it's good or bad for me. And I could see it in my head. I could see the movie in my head. And we moved forward with reckless abandon once I got there. But until I could see how to be different, and I live by that to this day. You got three choices: better than, worse than, different than. What do you want to do? If you want to be better than somebody, you better have a big set of balls and lots of money, because it's never as easy as it looks. Nobody wants to be less than, but anybody can be different. That's where it takes creativity. And when I look at things now, I look at WWE now, and obviously we both have friends there, and I have a lot of respect from Vince on down. I've got nothing but good things to say about WWE, even after in fact, because of my last experience, where I really got to know everybody a little bit better. But their content is flat. Up until WrestleMania, when we saw the Boneyard match and the Firefly Funhouse, I mean, literally, you could watch one match from 2 months ago and watch one match from 7 years ago, and it's kind of the same thing. And they need to find a way to be different from themselves, really, because I think the audience has become saturated with the product as it has been for the last 10 years. They've just seen it all and seen enough of it. And I think they've reached a certain level where, a certain amount of people are going to hang with it. But, you look at Monday Night Raw, they're doing 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, maybe 2.4 million people depending on the time of year. SmackDown came out of the chute at 3.8. Now it's hovering about 2.5 consistently, because until they find out a way to present something that's different than what they've been doing for the last decade, they're going to hold steady at that plateau. You look at AEW, started out with 1.5 million viewers on their debut night, something like that, a little more than that. Yeah. Now coronavirus, empty arena stuff aside, we'll just put that off to the side. They were hovering around that 700, 800,000 viewer level, which is almost half of what they started out with. They're not really that different. It's different talent, but the presentation isn't really that much different. Somebody's got to come up with something new and something exciting that changes the industry in order to reinvigorate the industry. And if they do, they'll come back. We saw that with SmackDown premiere on Fox. Now, granted, Rock was all over it and Fox spent a fortune promoting it. But nonetheless, 3.8 million viewers showed up to sample the product. If they would have liked what they've seen, the second week and the third week and the fifth week, they would have stuck around, but they didn't, because it wasn't that different. It was just on a different network.
So when you look back, though, and maybe initially it was survival and, like you said, be different, but you think about, NWO was just this brilliant idea. And then also, I don't even know if you realize, but you had this incredible talent that kind of backed it up. Did you, at one point, I don't know when in your life, that you looked back and said, you know what, I changed an industry? Because when it all comes down to it, there's no other period where the world of professional wrestling changed more and for the better. And I think that, for the WWE, it forced them to raise their product level. But the other side of it is professional wrestlers, and I hope a few have thanked you, that they have guaranteed contracts, which I remember when I worked there, those guys were working for house show gates. So do you look at it and are you able to say, you know what, yeah, I did that?
I didn't really think about it at all until probably 10 years ago, maybe even not that long ago. Because I didn't really reflect on it. When I left WCW, I had a really bad taste in my mouth. I really did, for a lot of reasons. And
a lot of people, did too.
Some of it was self-inflicted. I mean, I was responsible for some of it, the way I felt. And I kind of put it in my rearview mirror, and I didn't think about it at all. Then I got hired by WWE as a talent, and I had a whole different perspective. But I didn't think about WCW, really. It wasn't until after I left WWE in 2005 or 6, whenever it was, 7, that I started to reflect back and went, wow, kind of like we talked about earlier. Had it not been for Nitro, had it not been for that moment when I sat in a room by myself and decided the only way to launch Nitro is to be different than the WWF and to identify all the ways to achieve that. Had I not done that, Nitro wouldn't have been a success. Had the NWO not, happened, the Monday Night Wars would have never happened. The Attitude Era would have never happened. Monday Night Raw going live every Monday night would not have happened. If you make a list of all the things that would not have happened had it not been for Nitro and the NWO and the competition that it created for the WWF, I think, this is going to sound way over the top, but I think it's arguable that WWE might not be around today, because it was that Monday Night War that elevated the industry as a whole, and certainly WWE coming out on top, and the momentum that they had created with The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin, that was a result of the competition.
Yeah.
I think had the Monday Night Wars not happened, I'm not sure that WWE would be around today. I'm not sure they would have gone public. I'm not sure they could have gone public.
So many people benefited from that. Yeah, so many people and the industry has benefited by it, and especially, I mean, the WWF was in trouble then when that all started, and it raised them to a new level and went on for years. Beyond that.
Sure, Sean, that I'm clear about this. I'm not taking credit for WWF success or WWE success. I don't mean to suggest that.
No, I'm not. You're saying the situation that everything that was involved in that, because of that competition, it forced the It's like, okay, they're going to put you out of business, and so it raised the level of everybody involved. And then, like you said, circumstances, and then you've got somebody like Rock comes along, and Stone Cold finds where his place is, and then it happens. But I know you're not saying that. That was all you.
No, not at all. And but again, it's like that. It's like the butterfly effect, I guess. You don't really realize something. It seems insignificant when it happens, but if you really think about it, the chain reaction of all the things that are a result of one decision, one choice, one moment, can have on an industry, it's kind of mind-boggling. It's fun to think about.
Yeah, it really is. There's so many relationships you developed along the way there, but one I've really been fascinated with is with Hulk Hogan. And I don't think a lot of people know how close that relationship was with you. And first of all, I mean, when you wanted to get him down there, was it a rocky start, or did you guys hit it off immediately? And then how did it develop?
No, we get along right away. I mean, Hulk's, I'm sure you've met Hulk. He
worked with him.
I mean, he's an easy guy. He's a good-hearted soul. He likes to have fun. He's an easy guy to get along with. He's pretty chill. He's a beach bum. Back then, he was a big, strong, talented, charismatic beach bum. He was easy to get along with. But no, we hit it off pretty much right away. We weren't like we were friends right away, but it was easy to do business with him. We started becoming friends pretty quickly. And to this day, Hulk Hogan is my best friend. We still talk a couple times a week, and still, hang out with him whenever I'm down in Florida visiting our kids and that kind of thing. But I always got along. I mean, we had our moments. Don't get me wrong. There were moments when it was not pretty, and there were moments when it was not comfortable. There were moments when he was frustrated, and so was I. But that's life. That's working together. Nothing's ever perfect.
Yeah. And so when this all ended with the WCW, I think initially you wanted to get out of the business, but as we both know, it just pulls you back in. And I didn't know when you started doing these other productions with Jason Hervey. How long before that did that keep going, or did that all get put on the sideline while during those years with the wars, or were you still doing work outside of that? No,
I mean, Jason and I were, we were developing projects for WCW together. Because one of the visions that I had for WCW was to expand beyond wrestling, much like WWF or WWE has done successfully.
Right.
You know, especially when we merged with Time Warner. Wow, well, we've got a movie studio, you know, that we should have some synergy with. So that's how Ready to Rumble, you know, came about. We were working on some animation projects, and you know, so I was dabbling in non-wrestling related projects, but to benefit WCW. That would have been a part of WCW, not as an independent producer. When I left WCW in '99, I think I coasted for about a year and a half or 2 years, and then you know I didn't need the money, and I was young and whatever. I just wasn't interested in doing anything at the time. Wasn't sure what I was going to do either, but not feeling any pressure. And that's when I called out Jason and I said, look, you know, let's pick up where we left off. You've got relationships in Hollywood. I've developed enough of my own. We've got some ideas. We work well together. Let's go pitch some shows. So we started in about 2002, and we had a good run. We were running hard until about 2012, 2013. And that's when the television industry really started changing dramatically. You know, we would go from having 2 shows, 3 shows a year that we would create and sell and produce to 1 every year and a half. Yeah. And the budgets, you know, went from here to here. And everybody wanted higher quality production values for less money. And, you know, we woke up one day in about 2013 or 2014 and said, wow, you know, the good news is, you know, we brought in $1.8 million in business, production dollars. The bad news is we made 1.8% profit on it because the margins just got crushed. And it's funny, you know, I thought one of my a good friend of mine is a guy by the name of Tom Bierce. Tom headed up National Geographic for Turner Broadcasting when I was running WCW, and we've remained friends. Tom went on to become one of the most successful non-scripted television producers in Hollywood, second only to probably Mark Burnett. He created Deadliest Catch and Ice Road Truckers and West Coast Choppers and you name it. If it's dangerous, testosterone-driven reality show, Tom produced it. And he's made a fortune. You know, he's made more money than God. And he and I were out, we had lunch about a year ago. And he said, we were talking about the television industry and how it's changed. And he said, Eric, if I had to start over today, even knowing everything that I've learned, even having all of the success that I've had over the last 25 or 30 years, if I had to start from scratch today, I couldn't survive. Wow. That's a hell of a statement about the television industry. It's really changed a lot. So that's why, you know, Jason and I pretty much got out of it about 2018 was the last show that we sold.
Oh, really? What is it that world like, though? I mean, after existing in what you were doing with the WCW, and you were involved in networks, you're in LA all the time, but a lot of people don't understand, and I pitched shows before too, and you know, people don't realize how tough it is. I know you said like the first one you had a couple of meetings, but what was it like being in that world, and really what does it take to get a show on, you know, actually get on the air for people to watch? Because there's thousands of shows that might even get a green light that you never see.
Yeah, well, you know, timing is, look, the first thing you have to, we learned, the first thing you have to know is you have to know your network. You have to know what they're thinking. You have to know where they're going. You can't walk into a meeting and go, oh, True TV, well, this is what they've been doing for the last 2 years. If you walk in with that, you know, in your holster, you're gonna get left for dead. You know what I mean? You have to know where they want to be, not where they've been, because they're making decisions. First of all, if I came into you, Sean, if you were a network executive and I pitched you a show and you went, wow, this is the best idea I've ever heard, I'm going to buy it on the spot right now. It'll take 18 months before it sees the light of day. Yeah. It takes that long. Yeah. And maybe longer in some cases, depending on how complicated the show is. But you may not last 2 years from now, right? You may not be there in 6 months, because the turnover in the television industry You know, if you're a television executive, you walk into a television executive's office in Hollywood, they very rarely have pictures of family or dogs or any personal memorabilia on the walls because they all know if you last 2 years with the network, you're like old, you're an old.
There's a box in the corner, just like.
So the first thing that we learned is you've got to pitch the chair, not the person.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, you've got to know the network you're pitching. You've got to do your research. Hopefully your agents are smart. They know where the network wants to be a year and a half from now or 2 years from now. So you take your idea and you shape it towards that goal, as opposed to saying, hey, I've got an idea because you used to do this show. I saw it last month. So I'm going to pitch a show because it's kind of like that. They've probably already left that strategy behind. Yeah. So my point is, you've got to know your network. You've got to do your research. And it's tough. You know, here's the other thing that's tough about it. And I should be careful how I say this because I'm not completely out of that business yet. But, all right, there's no way to say it without just saying it. The majority of people that I've ever pitched are the least creative, least imaginative, same thing, I guess, most job-scared people I've ever met in my life. Yeah. They're way more comfortable saying no because you can't get fired for saying no. You can get fired for saying yes and having something not work out. And by the way, I think the odds of if I pitched you a show, you loved it, we actually made it to air, the chances of that show being successful are about 1 in 10 or 1 in 8. So, I mean, it's a little bit like going to Vegas. You know, the odds are really against you. But here's the good news: if you create a show, you pitch a show, and you hit, you can. I mean, you look at shows like Biggest Loser. You look at show. I mean, what is the dating show where the guy gives a girl a rose, and The Bachelor?
Oh, the Bachelor and Bachelorette. Yeah.
Really, that show has been on for how long? Since the beginning of
television? Well, look, how about Survivor? Somebody came up, we're just going to drop these people on an island. I would have loved to have been Jeff Probst to get that job. My God.
Well, and there's an interesting story behind that. I don't know if you know the story behind that at all, but, you know, Mark Burnett is a real entrepreneur. Yeah. I'm not going to try to tell the story here because we'll be here till tomorrow morning. But, you know, everybody turned that show down. Nobody wanted that show.
Really?
Every network he pitched that show to passed on it. And then Mark believed in it so much that he went and convinced several rather large sponsors to take the financial risk so the network didn't have anything to lose. Uh-huh. Now, as a result, Mark ended up owning much more of the show than he would have otherwise, because whoever writes the check owns the show, right? So if typically the network pays for everything on a show and you get a percentage of it as your fee. But when you walk in with a show that you found a way to pay for so the network doesn't have to write a check, you end up owning a big part of that show, and that's what catapulted Mark Burnett.
You know, you look at your list of your shows, and it really stands out, like you said, different. I just look at this, I'm like, every one of these things that he produced is so different than the next. And one of them, and you get grief sometimes about your the reality shows with Scott Baio, but we at that time, when you think about those shows, and then look what's happened since then with these reality shows. So at that, when you were doing that, were you saying, you know, I have a feeling this stuff is going to work, that people want to see this stuff?
Well, I mean, the Scott Baio show was a good example. You know, that was, I can't remember what year that was. It all runs together for me now. Yeah. Probably 2008, I'm thinking, or 2009. But that's when celebriality, that was the buzzword.
Yeah.
Every network wanted celebriality. Yeah. And Jason Hervey had a great relationship with Scott Baio. They had known each other since they were kids. Scott's a super nice guy. I get along with Scott really well. So because of Jason, really, not me, we were able to go to Scott and said, hey, let's do a show called Scott Baio's 45 and Single. Because he was 45 and single. And he's a very popular guy with the ladies in Hollywood. And was known for that. So we did that show, and it was a huge success. And when that show was over, again, because of the length of time it takes to sell a show, pitch a show, develop a show, shoot a show, and then see it on TV is about a year and a half, 2-year window. Well, we wrapped on the show, got it up on a year, and then Scott got married. And Work wanted to do another Scott Baio season. So, okay, what are we going to do? He's not 45 and single. He's 46 and married. So, but again, that was very celebrity driven. The Hulk Hogan Celebrity Championship Wrestling that we did for CMT. I didn't want to use celebrities. I really didn't. I wanted to use real people, but the network wanted celebrities. So we got Dustin Diamond and Erin Murphy that used to be the Bewitched girl, and Tiffany and Dennis Rodman, and we got all these Danny Bonaducci, and we had a whole trailer full of celebrities trying to become wrestlers because that's what the networks wanted at the time. So we had, primarily because of Jason, we had good relationships with B-list celebrities, so we were able to get a lot of them integrated into our shows.
What was a tougher pool to swim in, wrestling or Hollywood?
What was it?
What was a tougher pool to swim in, Hollywood or professional wrestling?
Oh, I think professional wrestling is harder.
Really?
Yeah, the politics. Look, it's a universe of one. You know what I mean? It's really tough in today's environment. Now, when there was WWF and WCW and there was still some territories, it was a little bit different. But now, it's tougher now, I think, in wrestling. At least in Hollywood, now it's different today than it was even 5 years ago. But when we were really active in it, we had 6 or 8 networks that we could call up the network president, not the executive in charge of buying shows or a VP. We could call up the head of the network and say, hey, we've got a hot one. Can we meet you for a cocktail or meet you for lunch and stop by the office? And we had enough credibility that we could get those meetings pretty easily. So that made it easier in a way. But again, none of it's easy. It's all tough. I don't think anything that's worthwhile is easy.
Yeah. So what was it like going back to the WWE? I've always wondered. I've been back a couple of times, but not invited back. And what was it like for you to go back into that world? And you were actually there in Stamford.
Oh, my most recent run?
Yeah.
It was,
And has Vince changed as far as working with him?
I don't know, because I never worked. I mean, I worked with Vince a little bit when I was a talent there. I would interface with Vince, and there were some, there were scenes that we would do together, or occasionally he would produce something that I was involved in. But my interaction with him was extremely limited. I mean, I never really got to know Vince McMahon when I was there as a talent, other than, the occasional interface that we would have with regard to something we were doing on television. But it was rare. So I never really got to know Vince as a talent. I kind of felt like I knew him through other people, but I never really developed my own. We never went out and we never had a serious conversation about anything, which was kind of weird. You would think at some point, either one of us would have instigated or initiated a conversation to kind of talk about, what were you really thinking when I was doing this? What was the reaction? What were you, it would have been fun to have that
conversation. So you've never had that conversation about what was going on then, or?
No, never.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so going back, it was weird. Part of me was really excited about it because I missed the business, and there were people at WWE to this day that I consider some of my closest friends that I was anxious to work with again. Kevin Dunn and his team, I mean, that team is second to none on the planet. Yeah. They're so capable of doing so many amazing things, as evidenced by the Firefly Funhouse and the Boneyard match and all the other things that they've done over the decades. And I was really excited. Bruce was there, and I love Bruce Pritchard. Other than Hulk, he's one of my closest friends. Yeah. So I felt good about it, and I missed it. I wanted to I was hoping to find that desire, that passion, that I had missed because I'd been away from it for so long. But truth be told, it didn't happen, and it didn't happen for a lot of reasons. And it was my failure to adapt. It was my failure to find a way to find that passion and cultivate that passion within an environment that was totally alien to who I am. I'm not this is going to sound so childish, but it's true. I'm not a suit and tie guy. I'm just not. When I'm at my creative best and when my passion flows, it's because I'm in the right room with the right people. We're relaxed. The chemistry's got to be right. And I think it's true for everybody. It's not just me. Chemistry is everything in the creative process. Yeah. If you could be the most creative person in the world, and I could be the most creative person in the world, and this person could be the most creative, we could all be in our own ways, unique ways, some of the most creative people at our jobs. But if we don't like each other, or we just haven't learned to communicate with each other, we don't have to we just haven't really bonded or found that energy. And it's kind of like harmony, until you finally find a way to hit that note together, it's just chunky and clunky. And that's kind of the way I felt the whole time I was there. And that was on me.
Did you know right away? That this isn't right?
I knew within the first couple of weeks that it was going to be hard, because I really tried. I mean, I wanted to, but I couldn't really get close to Vince. I couldn't really break that wall. There were a lot of things going on. I'm not going to go into them, but there was a lot of challenges that were going on at the time that had nothing to do with me, that everything was very disoriented and a little confusing prior to me getting there, and certainly even after I got there. And I was, hoping that once that dust settled and things settled in, we got launched on Fox, that we'd be able to get into that groove. But again, that's my responsibility to make that happen. In reflecting on it a little bit, I realized, a couple of weeks after I left, that it wasn't up to Vince McMahon or WWE as a whole to adapt to Eric Bischoff. It was up to Eric Bischoff to adapt to their environment. And I failed at that. I wasn't able to do it.
Well, it seemed like you were at peace with it right away. I think that when you walked away from it, when it was over, that I see, hearing you talk on your show and everything else that went with that, it wasn't like, damn it, that it just didn't work. But you seem like you're also in a point in your career that you're more trying to make sure you're happy, and not proving something.
Well, yes and no. I mean, look, I wanted it to work. I took it as.
Did you have something to prove though? Did you feel like I got to go back there? And I feel like in some ways it's like Bruce, and I love him, and I worry about his health because. And going and jumping back into that, I just felt like he had unfinished business. Did you feel that way?
No, I didn't feel. No, I didn't feel that at all. I wanted to work with, because Bruce and I worked together at TNA, and it didn't happen overnight, but we really clicked, and it took a little while. But the chemistry was good. Obviously, we had a lot of affection for each other, respect for each other. We liked hanging out together. Which matters. Some of the best ideas that Bruce and I came up with, shooting the shit over a pizza, as opposed to sitting in a sterile room with a notepad in our $1,200 suits with a rope around our neck. A tie. It's just different. So I was really anxious to work with Bruce, as well as other people in WWE, and more than anything, Sean, I was hoping to find that passion that had been missing. For quite a while about the wrestling business. And I really hoped and thought that once I stepped back in it, and once I got into the groove, that fire would light up again. And because of the situation and my failure to adapt to it, it just didn't.
Yeah. So what's next? I mean, you've got, I know that there was the Hulk biopic that was in the works. And I mean, what do you have on the platter now? Or are you just going to take it easy for a while? What are you doing besides 83 weeks, of course?
The podcast, I love doing that. It's fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I really enjoy doing that. I am working on a Netflix project where it's moving along very nicely. I can't say too much more about it than that. Because, because they're Netflix and I'm not.
Yeah.
And they get to write all the rules. But that project's moving along very, very well, and I'm very excited about it. That's going to be a life-changing opportunity. A lot of things will come out of that I'm looking forward to. But in addition, I've got a television show that I'm working on, a game show that was brought to me by a third party that is really unique and very interesting. So I'm still have my fingers in the television business a little bit, but only on projects that I really get excited about. I'm not looking for just a transaction. When Jason and I were working and we were really cranking, and we were for, several years, we were producing shows that I couldn't even watch. I mean, we were producing them and I was making a lot of money off of them, but I couldn't even watch them because I just couldn't. Some of them were just mindless, but it's what the networks wanted. And it was transactional. We were doing business. There was no passion, but there was a lot of money. So now I don't want to do that anymore. I need to feel passion. I need to be super excited. I want something that keeps me up 18 or 20 hours a day. And when I do finally go to sleep, I can't wait to wake up and do it all over again. Otherwise, I don't want to do it. So I'm taking, a television project here, television project there. The Netflix project is something I'm very passionate about. And there's another potential for a series of movies that I'm developing right now with another group out of Los Angeles that I'm pretty excited about. But that's about it.
Yeah, well, folks, we'll have to wait and see. Before I let you go, though, Eric, I did want to mention Howard Finkel, as I mentioned that when we were recording this, it was the day that we learned of Howard's passing, and he had a big influence on me early on. And as I said, he produced the event center, and I just remember him. We'd be in these rooms, and he'd be there. They didn't have laptops, and he had these big legal books that he would have all the boys' interviews lined up, and he used just to love it. And I'd get the call on the red phone on the desk, and he'd tell me that the Berserker got hurt, and I got to redo some markets. But really, it's a sad day. And Howard, people don't know, he was so much more than a ring announcer. He was so involved in that company and did a lot of stuff behind the scenes. I don't know how much interaction you had with Howard, but I know you are very aware of what he did for that company, and it's really sad to hear of his passing.
It was, when I first got to WWE as a talent, my first run, if you will, it was awkward not for me. For whatever reason, it was not a big deal to me. I mean, it was a big deal, and I was excited about the scope of the opportunity and my role in it. But yeah. I wasn't like consumed with all the politics of it all or the personalities of it at all. I mean, I walked in like I'd been there for 20 years. Yeah. It's the way I carried myself.
Yeah, right.
But I was also aware that a lot of other people weren't uncomfortable, but they weren't really sure how to be comfortable, I guess is the best way of saying it. I was still the enemy. I was still that guy. And there were still some people at very high levels who still had ass rash over it, to this day still do. So everybody was kind of tiptoeing around and not really sure how to react to me. And I remember one of my first evenings, backstage, Howard Finkel was like one of the first one. That look, that smile on his face, he kind of cocked his head a little bit. He had that smile on his face and his eyes were just beaming, and he couldn't wait to come up and introduce himself and, ask me all kinds of questions and welcome me to he was like the ambassador, to WWE, to me. Yeah. And every time I saw him, he always amazed me. He was one of those people that was just always up, and he never, not in every conversation I ever had with Howard, but I would say in every third conversation I would have with Howard, he would somehow remind me in a different way each time that he was actually, technically, the first employee in the history of WWE.
That's right.
Which is why today, when I heard of his passing, I didn't say a lot. I just said, Fink, you'll always be number one. Rest in peace.
Yeah.
Because nobody can take that away from him, you know. And I don't think most people got that. I mean, people that know him like you, yeah, you probably get it, but not many people. He was very proud of that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Which is why I wanted to give him props, and I hope he saw that, and I hope he got a big smile on his face.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there was no greater day in his life than when he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and much deserved. There was never a more loyal employee to that company.
Oh,
and he's going to be missed. Yeah, and I know he'd been sick for a while, and I tried to get in touch with him. I would have loved to have had him on the podcast, but he was very ill for the last couple of years, it sounds like, and I really wish I would have had an opportunity to see him. I saw him at a show in Jersey a few years ago, but I owe him a lot. He really helped me through those early years there, and it was really sad to hear of his passing. But Eric, I really want to thank you for coming on. I've waited a long time for us to have this conversation. Every time we've run into each other, it's kind of like, hey, how you doing? But I'm glad we finally got a chance to sit down. And folks, I could tell you, Eric Bischoff is not done yet. And of course, you can catch him every week on the one of the franchise podcasts of Conrad Thompson, 83 Weeks. Very entertaining stuff. It's not just about the Monday Night Wars. It's great stuff, and I hope you're enjoying it. You enjoy doing the show?
I look forward to it. I really do. When I get done doing that podcast, after every show, I say, Conrad, what did you think? Because I get excited. I start getting myself so excited. I think everything was great. Conrad's a little more objective. Yeah. I say, Conrad, how was the show? How was the show? And he gives me his honest critique about it. And then I can't wait for it to come out so I can listen to it. And I every time I do that show, my wife says, so how was it? And I talk about it for 45 minutes or an hour. I get so excited doing it. So I'm grateful to Conrad. I wasn't really interested in doing a podcast. I'd done one and it wasn't very successful. So when Conrad came along and said, hey, why don't we do one together? I was like, kind of did it, kind of failed, and kind of don't want to fail at that again. I don't mind failing at something. I just don't want to fail at the same thing twice. Try to avoid that. Not that it hasn't happened before, but he convinced me. He said, no, man, there's, the audience, because I didn't believe that there was an audience for the Monday Night War era topics. As you said, there's been DVDs, there's been books, there's been 2,485 shoot interviews with 2,487 people that don't know what they're talking about. There's been so much stuff written about and talked about the Monday Night Wars. It's like, dude, nobody wants to hear it anymore. It's over. It's dead. Let it die. And he convinced me I was wrong. And I'm so grateful to Conrad for it because A, I've had a lot of fun, and B, I've made a lot of money. And who doesn't love that?
Can't beat that. He is the podfather.
He is. He's a smart guy. He really is.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, you take care and stay safe. And I'm glad you're in a nice place to sit this out. But it sounds like you don't mind sitting there. So thanks for coming on Primetime.
Matter of fact, I'm going to grab my dog and take a hike. So there you go.